Hey, good morning, everybody. It's 10:30. Let's go ahead and get started with the May 2022 Wild Science webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. I am actually hosting the webinar from Village Creek State Park today, attending a fisheries meeting. So I'm going to be very brief with introductions and let these presenters get going so I can get back to that fisheries meeting as quickly as possible. We're going to be hearing today from Jen Ballard and Eric Brickman. Jen's going to be talking about some CWD research, and Eric, surprise, is going to be talking about Alligator Gar. Jen's going to be going first, and I think most of us know Jen, but Dr. Jen Ballard is the state wildlife veterinarian and assistant chief of research for the Game and Fish Commission. She's a native Arkansan from North Little Rock, has a Bachelor of Science degree in Fisheries and Wildlife Biology from Arkansas Tech, and attended veterinary school at the University of Missouri, and has a PhD in veterinary and biomedical sciences from the University of Georgia. Dr. Ballard previously served as a veterinary medical officer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service before joining us about 5 years ago. Jen, take it away.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Trey. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. We got you, Jen.
Thank you. All right, then I will share my screen and we can get started. Okay, are you guys seeing that in presentation mode?
Looks great, Jen.
Okay, perfect. Just checking. All right. So what I'll be presenting today, and of course, I'm not a social scientist, so please bear with me. But I'm actually presenting the results of a social science survey that we did of Arkansas hunters to assess their thoughts and responses to CWD in our state and our management actions for it, what they have heard, what they feel currently, and what they may think about some ideas we have for the future. So with that, just jump into some of our key findings. It was a very long survey, so I won't be able to go through everything, but the final technical report will be on our website, so that'll be available for anyone who wants more information down the road. So the goals of our survey were to assess the attitudes of Arkansas hunters towards CWD. We wanted to know their past behaviors, their communication preferences, how they wanted to receive information, their level of agency, trust, and support for our CWD management actions, and what behaviors they plan to engage in the future. We wanted to compare these findings to a survey we conducted in 2017, as well as similar surveys conducted in other states. And we specifically included some questions about hunter motivations in terms of just general participation, because we felt that there may be correlations between a hunter's motives for participating in deer hunting to their response to CWD and CWD management. So we wanted to make some of those more general comparisons. This was an email survey conducted between April 5th of 2021 and May 4th of 2021. We used license holders for the state of Arkansas going back to 2006 because we wanted to capture people who may have actually stopped hunting since the initial detection of the disease. So we wanted to kind of go back and talk to those people that we may have lost along the way, because you always hear people say that we lose hunter participation based on CWD. I think you'll see from these results that that's really not been a trend that we've seen in our state or in many other states, but we wanted to evaluate that possibility. We did speak primarily to Arkansas resident deer hunters, and that means over 14,000 license holders were contacted. Over 1,300 completed 75% or more of the survey. There were 6 sections to the survey. Loosely, we talked about the hunter's history and motivations for participation, their general knowledge and information sources for CWD, their practices and risks of perception regarding the disease, their trust and attitudes towards management, their predicted behaviors for the future, and then we asked demographics last. And so along the way, we had hunters that didn't complete all the way to the end of the survey, so the sample size is not necessarily the same for every question. So overall, regarding hunter motivations, we asked the hunters initially, like, how important is deer hunting to you as one of your recreational activities? The vast majority said that it was one of their more important activities, if not their most important activity. There's probably a participation bias in that. If you are less passionate about deer hunting, you may be less likely to fill out a survey about deer hunting. But this would also mean that we're probably hearing from those people most impacted by CWD regulations. So that's probably a bias we can live with. Question 4, we asked what the motivations were for hunters to participate in deer hunting. How we gave them a list of 8 options and asked how important each of these was to their decision to go deer hunting. Now, these were not mutually exclusive. A hunter could literally say that all 8 options were very important to them, but the larger majority responded that time spent in nature was a very important reason for them. A significant number also said that time spent with friends and family was a very important reason for participation. A little less than half indicated that obtaining wild game meat was a very important reason for them to go hunting. And they also, about 42% indicated it was very important to them that they contribute to wildlife management. Looking at the less important reasons, testing their skills, physical exercise, contributing to their local community. And what we had in mind there would be, the economic benefits of participating in hunting to their local community, or to harvest a trophy. And in descending order, fewer and fewer people indicated that those were important reasons for them to participate in hunting. We asked if they had gone hunting at any time during the past 5 years, and the majority said yes. 46%, a total of 4% said no. We asked them what if they indicated that they had not hunted, we asked them what their primary reasons were to gauge whether that was related to CWD. In the end, the vast majority indicated that if they had not hunted in the last 5 years, it was due to personal reasons, and only 1 respondent indicated that it was CWD related. And even that respondent, when we looked at their answers further, indicated that they plan to hunt again in the future. We asked them if they had submitted animals for testing, and a significant number in the CWD management zone had. We asked them why they had chosen to submit their animals for testing. And actually the most common reason, we sort of anticipated that it would be the food safety issue, which was also a common response, but actually the more common response was that they wanted to do their part to help our agency monitor for CWD. And I think that speaks volumes about the level of support and investment that our hunters have in the resource and in this issue. We had an idea that maybe some of them were having their animals tested because they were feeling pressure from friends or family members. And that was not a common response, although it was more common outside the CWD management zone. We wanted to know how hunters wanted to be communicated with, and so we asked them, first of all, where they had gotten information in the past about CWD. And some of their most used sources historically included the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission guidebook, our website, and other non-governmental social media sites. Comparing this to 2017 responses, it's very interesting. I think AGFC materials probably still reflects a very similar response, our guidebook, our website, but newspapers were actually the most common response in 2017, and they were one of the least common responses in 2022. So I think that this just reflects changes in society and generally how people are acquiring information right now. Some of the least used sources reported by the respondents included AGFC public meetings, radio, local newspaper, the Arkansas Department of Health, and actually the statewide paper was just a little bit above these other 4, but also not a very common response. So a trend there in changes of how people are getting information specifically about CWD. So then after knowing where they had historically gotten information, we wanted to know where they wanted to get information about this in the future. Some of the most preferred responses included our guidebook. So I think clearly we're doing something right, making this information available in a really recognizable and readily used source. They like our website. They're going to go to some non-governmental social media pages. We didn't specify what those were. we got some answers that were new in our open-ended responses, particularly podcasts and scientific literature, which is very interesting. Podcasts, it's hard to gauge since these were open-ended responses. I think when we repeat this survey in the future, we'll want to list podcasts as an option that they can sort of quantify relative to the other preferred options. Right now, it's a little hard to tell whether that's a commonly used source or just a very popular source among some sort of diehard podcast fans. So we need to evaluate that a little more, but it was not referenced at all in 2017. So again, I think that represents some social changes in how people acquire information. The request for scientific literature was very interesting. It's hard to know what people would put in that category that they consider scientific literature, but it may mean we want to think about adding more references and direct links to published literature on our website. Some of the least preferred options would include the AGFC public meetings, our Arkansas Wildlife TV show, and the Arkansas Department of Health. The TV show, I think specifically, is one we have to take with a grain of salt because that's not available statewide. So that may be a least preferred source since it's not actually in all markets and available to all people. But it's hard to know whether segments from the TV show are being accessed through our YouTube page as well. So it's kind of hard to know whether that's being used through other methods. As far as public meetings go, I think this speaks to maybe our need to evaluate our public meeting format and to use that time maybe a little differently in the way we communicate and connect with our public. And I think it's maybe just a little counterintuitive for people. I don't think they're going to the Department of Health website for CWD information, although it is there and we do link to it, I believe. So we asked people if they had enough information about CWD generally, not necessarily from us, but from any source. And mostly people really did feel like they had plenty of information, about where the disease was occurring, what species it occurred in, what precautions hunters should take if there were some areas that had some questions. It looks like livestock health and human health risk may be an area that they're still looking for a little bit more information. Then we specifically asked them how we had done as an agency in communicating with them, whether they felt that we had been truthful with information about how CWD spreads, about human safety issues, how timely we had been in sharing information. And generally, we had strong support that most people agreed that we had done a very good job of communicating these important issues with them. We asked them overall, what level of risk do you think CWD poses, first to deer populations in the state and then also to humans in the state. They were given options of not a risk, low risk, or high risk. Most people said that the disease they felt was either a high or a low risk to the deer population, and then generally low risk to human populations. And I think that lines up really well with the science and with the message that us and others have put out. So I think that really demonstrates that we're sharing and reaching our audience pretty well, that they have this kind of level of situational awareness. Then we wanted to know how hunters were changing their behaviors or might be willing to change their behaviors in the future. So we asked them, since 2016, what have you as a hunter done differently? The most common response is that hunters were more observant of signs of health in deer, which is great. It's good that they're paying attention to that and maybe being more observant. But since we know that CWD has a very long incubation period, I do worry that maybe people are overestimating the significance of what they can observe with their eyes versus having their deer actually tested. A few people said they had harvested a fewer deer or hunted less often. Significant numbers said they had reduced their use of bait. And a very small number had indicated they had stopped paying for hunting leases. So those are some of the trends that we really want to keep an eye on. But only 2% indicated that they had stopped hunting. Very, very few had changed hunting locations. So for the most part, hunters are not making large changes to their behavior based on CWD. We asked them what they thought of our overall management strategy, whether they felt we had followed best science, whether we had given adequate opportunities for hunters to express their concerns, whether we had implemented appropriate regulations, just sort of big picture overall. And generally, our respondents indicated that they felt we had done a good job, that they agreed we had followed science and have been managing this issue pretty well. We wanted to kind of boil it down to one big question, though. Do you feel our management overall is too aggressive, not aggressive enough, or about right? And the vast majority of hunters, and you'll see this is actually broken up across 3 zones. Most of the other responses are pooled, but the green zone hunters are hunters that hunt most frequently outside the CWD management zone. The yellow zone hunters are those that hunt in counties adjacent to the CWD management zone, and the red zone hunters are hunters that hunt most frequently within the CWD management zone. And across all regions, you can see that most hunters, or most respondents to this survey, indicated they felt our management was just about right in terms of the level of aggressiveness. We asked hunters what they would, or how they felt about some of the changes we had already made, whether they supported or opposed those changes, including opportunities for landowners to remove additional deer, our carcass movement restrictions within the state, the increase in bag limits in some areas. We've prohibited deer rehabilitation, the use of lures containing natural urine or other body fluids, restricting the use of bait in the CWD management zone, and removing antler point restrictions. And you can see that hunters were largely very strongly supportive of the opportunities for landowners. They understood the carcass movement restrictions and the increased bag limits. Most of them were pretty neutral on the subject of deer rehabilitation. We did not have strong opposition to the lures, the baiting restrictions, or the antler point restrictions, but we had a much more broad response, a broader range. It's still sort of that bell-shaped curve, but we had a lot more diversity in those responses. And so those are areas we'll certainly want to communicate more with our public to help them understand why we've made those changes and what the relationship of those changes is to CWD management. We asked hunters what our priorities should be in terms of moving forward, what we want, what they wanted us to prioritize in our own management. And we gave them several options: to slow the spread of CWD to new areas, to minimize the exposure of humans and animals to CWD, to minimize the effects of CWD on the wildlife populations, to maximize opportunities for trophies, and to maximize opportunity to harvest large numbers of deer. And this was one these last 2, we kind of borrowed from some surveys that Fisheries had done. We were really impressed with the idea of just asking hunters, instead of assuming what they wanted, asking them, do you want bigger fish or do you want more fish? And we kind of asked that. Do you want to harvest more deer? Do you want to harvest trophy deer? But overall, when they ranked those out, hunters or respondents to this survey generally thought that they wanted our highest priorities to be slowing the spread of CWD to new areas, minimizing the effects of CWD on our deer population, minimizing exposure, and then maximizing opportunities for harvest and maximizing opportunities for trophies were actually pretty far down there. That was not what our general public or the responders to this survey generally wanted us to prioritize when we thought about our management of CWD. So then we wanted to float some ideas for possible changes that we might want to make in the future, and just see what people thought of it. That included, how would people respond if we required CWD testing in certain areas or during certain time periods. This is actually done in Missouri. So we just wanted to evaluate how hunters would respond, increase the number of bucks that could be harvested, a full prohibition on baiting in the CWD management zone. Right now, we just have a restriction, allowing professionals to cull deer in CWD affected areas, charging a fee for CWD testing. We also just wanted to kind of have the null option of what would you think if we stopped all of our current management efforts? And overwhelmingly, that had the strongest opposition. So I think that really demonstrates that our hunters absolutely want us to keep working toward managing this this disease. They were a little bit more supportive of requiring testing over certain periods of time and in certain areas. Again, we have that bell-shaped curve when we get to the issue of baiting and feeding. We had kind of a mixed response to the idea of professional culling, which we've used now in one location. And they were generally pretty opposed to the idea of paying a fee for CWD testing. So I think that's something we're going to have to continue planning and budgeting for in the future, because that was just not an acceptable option for the hunters, the respondents to this survey. So what are our big picture findings from this survey? Hunters are very concerned about CWD. They're concerned about what it'll do to our deer populations moving forward. They are largely very supportive of our current management actions and strongly oppose cessation of CWD management in the state. Agency trust on this issue is very strong, but I think we were able to identify some areas where we can focus our communication moving forward. I think we're doing a great job using our guidebook and our website. We might want to make sure that those stay refreshed and have we always keep current information on there, but we might want to look at it with some new eyes and just make sure we always keep that as fresh as possible. Our public meetings, I think, is something that warrants evaluation. Not that we would not do public meetings moving forward, but maybe the format needs to change so that we use those opportunities to better engage with the public. We may want to really look at some new communication methods like podcasts, or other things. As new technologies become more and more popular in society, we'll need to adapt to those. And we want to continue building understanding and support for our management strategies by continuing to communicate these important issues with our hunters. With that, I would like to thank Ashley Gramza, formerly of Arkansas Game and Fish, for helping us develop the survey, the Wildlife Management Division, Deer Team Research Division, and the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture at Monticello. They have helped us develop the technical report for this and will be helping us move it to publication. This was funded by Pittman Robertson dollars. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Jen. Any questions? Jen, I'll pose one. Given what you learned about communications, how do you think this will affect the way we communicate about CWD moving forward?
Well, I think I kind of mentioned some of those things in there. I do want to kind of refresh our website, maybe add some scientific links to the scientific literature so that people who are interested in that can access some of those primary references if they want to know more. I would like to think about how we use our public meetings, like maybe having more small group kind of meetings where we can go a little bit more in depth. And podcasts, I'm really excited about maybe using podcasts to communicate about CWD and other conservation issues. I think that's a really fun sort of longer format media that we can really utilize to help people get the information they need to remain trusting and informed on this issue.
Well, good news. We are, you are well aware, but others on the conference may not be aware that we are currently developing a podcast and should be hitting devices in the very near future. Jen, thank you so much. Appreciate that presentation. Let's move on to Eric Brickman. Eric is Assistant Chief of Aquatic Conservation in the Fisheries Division. Began his career as a fisheries biologist, first in Camden, later out of the Hope office. He served on our agency's Alligator Gar species management team from 2009 until 2021. Prior to his employment at Game and Fish, he completed a Master's of Science degree in Natural Resource Ecology and Management from Oklahoma State in 2008. And part of that, he studied alligator gar populations in the Red River. as part of that program. In 2003, he completed a Bachelor's of Science in Biology at Arkansas Tech. Eric's a certified fisheries professional with the American Fisheries Society and an active member of AFS. And he's lived in Arkansas most of his life, primarily in the southwest corner, where he enjoys wade fishing, hiking, and preparing for the next hunting trip. Eric, tell us about Alligator Gar, man.
All right. Can you hear me all right, Trey?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Can you see my presentation now?
We have it, Eric. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I will be talking to you today about some research that we recently published in the North American Journal of Fisheries Management. My co-authors on that paper were Dr. Steve Lockman and Dylan Hand. I would encourage you to read that publication if you're interested in more of the specifics of this study, because I'll just be giving a general overview of the study and what we found. But before I begin talking about the study, I think it's always important to try to answer the question in the back of many people's mind, and that is, why should the Game and Fish Commission even care about gar? I think one of the main misconceptions is that many people don't understand is that there are actually 4 species of gar that occur in Arkansas out of the 7 known to occur in the world. Alligator gar are actually the largest and most rare of the 4 species that we have here in the state. And if you'll see from that map, all the areas in red indicate areas where alligator gar have been extirpated from their historic range. And areas of brown are areas where they're just clinging on. There's just remnant populations remaining compared to what was historically there. And the areas in black are places where we just don't know what's going on, either likely extirpated or just very minimal remnant populations remain. Because of these range contractions, the American Fisheries Society's Endangered Species Committee designated alligator gar as vulnerable to extirpation during their last meeting. It's because of this that many states have increased focus and research on this species in the past couple of decades. As I mentioned, this is the largest freshwater species of gar, but it's also the largest freshwater fish that occurs in Arkansas, and the 2nd largest freshwater fish in North America. Only the white sturgeon gets larger. It's because of this trophy potential and increased conservation concerns that the Game and Fish Commission began funding research, increasing management, and increasing regulation for alligator gar in the early 2000s. We funded several research projects with Dr. Bill Lair and his group, looking at alligator gar populations across the state as some of our initial efforts. This species was also designated the state primitive fish through the efforts of a young man out of Northwest Arkansas named Henry Foster. We did not previously have a state fish, and Henry thought this would be a great candidate, and was able to successfully work with legislators to get that done in, I believe, 2019. When I say Arkansas has trophy potential, we truly do have the opportunity to catch some magnificent fish here in Arkansas. We've been documenting alligator gar over 200 pounds since the 60s and before. The largest specimen ever rumored to have been caught in Arkansas was one that supposedly weighed 350 pounds out of the St. Francis River back in the 1930s. But we still have some incredible fish that occur here in the state, and these are just 2 of the largest that I've ever dealt with in my career. Some of the characteristics of alligator gar lend them to conservation concerns. It is a long-lived species. There have been animals that have been documented that have lived into their mid to late 90s, even possibly into their hundreds, based on aging errors and just the variability and ability to age something that old. With that long lifespan also comes an old age of maturity generally. The males generally don't reproduce until they're 7, and the females don't reproduce until they're around 14 years of age. This is very old for a fish when you compare something like a bass or a crappie. It is usually reproductive before the end of its second year. Of course, with an older age at maturity and very specific reproductive requirements environmentally, you also run into issues with infrequent reproduction. We've documented several populations of alligator gar in the state that likely only reproduce on a 7-year cycle or less. So you're not getting consistent spawns like you would another sport fish, which most of our species generally spawn every year. Of course, if it's not reproducing very often, it's also not supporting a very large population in general. Most of our populations are very low density, which it's common with an apex predator. There's just only so many that an ecosystem can support at the top of that food chain. One other interesting thing that came out of some research in Texas in the last decade is that alligator gar in that area, in that state, in most of their populations, generally, you don't see males over 6 feet long. This is a cause for concern because with our trophy anglers and trophy bow fishermen targeting these very large fish, they're targeting our females, our reproductive females. So we need to be very cautious and careful with our management of those large fish going forward. As I mentioned, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has increased management and focus on this species in recent times. In 2009, we established the Alligator Gar Species Management Team. I was one of the original members of that team. We were able to create our first management plan. It was accepted in 2011 with the first revision in 2017. These are the current members of that species management team who are a talented group of biologists that are strategically located around the state to help facilitate better management and coordination with the public in regards to this species. Now, onto the research that we did. This is one of the first things the species management team did to help better understand populations in the state. And our goals and objectives of this research were to evaluate the movements of alligator gar in relation to Felsenthal Lock and Dam, and to also look at macrohabitat use of alligator gar in the Ouachita River drainage near Felsenthal. We divided our macrohabitats into 4 primary habitat types, which were described by Ed Klunder in his master's thesis on the Fush-Lefebvre River here in Arkansas. We additionally added cutoff channels which were not present in the Fush for Ed's study. So if you're not familiar with Felsenthal, Felsenthal National Wildlife Refuge is located near the confluence of the Saline and Ouachita Rivers in south central Arkansas, near the Louisiana border. Felsenthal Lock and Dam forms Lake Jack Lee, approximately 30,000 acre reservoir on the main stem of the Ouachita River. Felsenthal Lock and Dam is the 3rd lock and dam in the Ouachita Black River Navigation Project. So our study primarily focused on the area between the confluence of the Saline and the Ouachita Rivers and a point on the Ouachita River main stem about 8 miles downstream of Felsenthal Dam. We also included a couple of backwater oxbows in this region to evaluate floodplain use by this species. Those 2 oxbows are Clear Lake, Arkansas, and Fish Lake, Louisiana. We used jug line sampling methods that we were pioneering at the time to collect our alligator gar. That we used a combination of jugs and hook and line to catch the fish and get them into a boat safely. We implanted fish surgically with ultrasonic transmitters so that we could detect fish as they pass by one of our 9 stationary submersible receivers. All these methods were being pioneered at the time. Most telemetry work with alligator gar previously had attached transmitters externally, but with high tag loss, there was a need to find a better way to attach or to affix these tags to the fish. We use Venco's proprietary View software to analyze our detections, to clean up the data and summarize it, extracting it to Excel for further analysis. So as I mentioned, we We summarized our data down to hourly events. So if a fish was detected at one of our stations more than once in a particular hour, we only counted one detection per hour per fish per station. We further evaluated these detections by 4 ecological seasons, also described by Ed in his research. The 4 ecological seasons do not align with a calendar season and are distinct for each species. So for alligator gar, those seasons were pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, and the winter period. We also looked at movement rates. So a movement was considered when a fish moved between one receiver and another receiver in consecutive hour timeframes. We also looked at how these movements related to 3 movement patterns, whether the fish was stationary near one of our receivers, moving between 2 receivers, or unaccounted for a period of time. We looked at movement characteristics such as linear home range and movement rate, movement frequency in relation to the size to see if there was any correlation between the size of the fish and how they moved. We also evaluated macrohabitat use using a chi-square goodness of fit test, looking at how frequently we expected to detect a fish in a macrohabitat type compared to what we actually observed. We further evaluated whether these detections changed through one of the 4 ecological seasons. So as you can see, Felsenthal lock and dam is a low head lock and dam. It is can only be manipulated between 65 feet and 70 feet mean sea level. So a very narrow range of manipulations at this system. There's very regular periods of time that this goes into overflow when a fish could easily navigate over the top of the dam, or even a boat can pass right through here along the river without hitting the dam. Maybe not every year, but at very frequent periods. We captured and released all of our fish in this general area. So what we were able to do was tag 16 alligator gar with ultrasonic transmitters. The fish were between 28 and 178 pounds, with our largest fish being just right at 7.5 feet long. We tracked our fish for a 1-year period beginning September 24th of 2014. We were able to document that all fish moved at some point post-surgery, indicating that they did survive the surgeries. We documented 12 of our fish moving down into Louisiana, with 11 of them returning at some point during the 1-year period. 2 of our fish were verified above the dam during our 1 year, and 2 fish were detected in an oxbow lake. We were never able to detect any of our 16 fish at the Clear Lake Station or the Saline River Station. So just to help you visualize how this went, we're using GAR 7 as an example. This fish was detectable throughout our 1-year period and just serves as an example of one of the 16 fish. So this fish was caught and released with a transmitter at the dam on September 25th of 2014. It then began traveling downriver and was next detected at our lowest receiver on October 17th, where it remained for about a 3-day period, just hung out in that general area. And then October 21st, it ran all the way back upriver to the dam and remained in that area until about February 26th. It then began moving downriver and was detected at the state line around March 17th and hung out in that area until March 23rd. It then went missing for several weeks. This was a flood period on the river, so it could have gotten out onto the floodplain or just bypassed one of our receivers, but showed back up at our lowest receiver on June 10th, where it hung out until July 27th. It then ran all the way back up to the dam and remained there until the end of our study on September 29th of 2015. So looking at mobility as compared to one of our 4 ecological seasons, that you can see a diversity of patterns where our post-spawn period illustrated most of the moving occurring during that period of the year. There's quite a bit of variability in detectability across these 4 seasons. During the wintertime, our fish seem to hang out in some area away from our receivers with a very large unaccounted for period for most of our fish. When you look at linear home range, you see three general patterns with 3 of our fish hanging out at the dam the entire time. That 365 river kilometer is the dam location. The vast majority of our fish use the area between the dam and our lowest receiver. Now, this is just a minimum estimate of home range. We know that the fish use an area much larger down into Louisiana. We just don't know the extent of that range, so we have to use this as just a conservative estimate of linear home range. And finally, we have a third pattern in which one fish used the entire extent of our survey area, going all the way to our highest receiver on the Ouachita River, near the confluence with the Saline, and also down to our lowest receiver down in Louisiana, with another fish using the area between the dam and our highest receiver. Now, this is just an example of one of our analysis related to size. All of them exhibited similar patterns where there's not really much of a pattern, much of a correlation between size of the fish and linear home range. We also looked at, again, frequency of movements, number of movement events, and just and periods of accountability where we could detect the fish. As I mentioned before, 2 of our fish did move up above the dam, and this is to illustrate when and how that occurred. So to orient you to this chart, this is a hydrograph. The squiggly line indicates the water level of Felsenthal Lock and Dam for the 1-year period that we were studying these fish. The bottom line indicates the lower level of the dam, and so all the shaded areas in gray indicate when a fish could have potentially moved above the dam. So there was a very large period of our study in which the river was in overflow and fish could have moved around or above the dam. As you notice, there's only one short period where this fish in early July moved up to our highest receiver across about a 2 to 3 day period. It left the dam, went straight up to our highest receiver and came right back and was detected at the dam where it hung out for an extended period. Gar 8 did a similar thing. In early July, it left the dam and went all the way to our highest receiver and hung out in that area for about a week and a half, and then came right back down to our lowest receiver, or back down to the dam, excuse me. So we can't really explain why the fish made this run or why only these 2 fish made that run. But based on the flooding and the timing, it suggests to me that this had something to do with a spawning run or attempted spawning run, just based on our knowledge from other alligator gar populations. So when we looked at macrohabitat use, so to help you orient to this chart, the top pie chart indicates, based on the number of receivers in each of the macrohabitat types, how frequently we would have expected to detect fish in those macrohabitats. So 45% of the time we would have expected to detect alligator gar in that habitat. The bottom pie chart indicates what we actually observed, with 85% of our detections being in that tailwater area. This suggests that fish are selecting this habitat type above all other habitat types. It seems to be very important to their life history, at least in this Ouachita system. Our main stem, which had the majority of our receivers, had very low detections, as well as our oxbow only had a very low use, which could have been related to accessibility to the oxbows. So in conclusion, and again, I encourage you to read our paper to understand the full extent of our conclusions, but we did note that 2 alligator gar moved above the dam. Movement rates and home range were greater during warm water periods, those being the spawn and post-spawn period. We did not document a relationship between mean movement rate, and distance that a fish moved. Home range did appear to be restricted during the winter period, which has also been observed in other telemetry studies with alligator gar. Movement rate did increase post-spawn, so they moved more often or moved faster during the post-spawn period, with fewer movements occurring in the actual spawning period. Relating to macrohabitat use, this was a very key finding in our research. that this tailwater area is extremely important during all ecological seasons to alligator gar. This hasn't been the case in other studies, but most other studies do not look at a highly regulated system like this. We also noted that side channels were important during that post-spawn period, possibly as a refuge habitat to get out of flow or just maybe chasing forage in that area. The oxbow lakes did not appear to be used extensively, at least from what we were able to document. And spawning, one of the other underlying goals of our study was to identify some spawning sites in this system so that we could either protect or augment or do what we could to encourage more frequent recruitment of this species in this system. So this is just one of the studies that we've done as part of the Alligator Gar species management team. Other efforts that we've had ongoing in the past 10 to 15 years include educating the public that not all gar are alligator gar, and that this species is interesting and important ecologically, socially to our fisheries in the state. We've also been working to estimate population abundance of some of our more abundant populations. Currently, we're working on the Red River with a mark recapture study, and we hope to expand those efforts to other populations once we've worked out the kinks in the Red River. We've also worked with Yvonne Allen of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to implement her habitat suitability index on the Red River system to identify potential spawning sites in that system. When water and weather conditions are right, we hope to go out and visually observe alligator gar spawning in some of these sites. If that works out, we'd like to expand that to other river systems in the state. Of course, we're also working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reestablish extirpated populations in the Arkansas River. If we can ever get fingerlings through their system, the Mammoth Springs National Fish Hatchery hopes to grow those out for us to stock into some of these pools in the future. Some of our future goals are to work with the Corps or landowners to improve spawning sites that encourage natural reproduction of the species so that we don't have to depend on hatchery systems to provide future stocks of alligator gar in the state. Of course, with any study, you have to thank the host of folks that assist with it. There've been a ton of game and fish staff that helped with this particular study, but also with other studies around the state. I couldn't begin to name them all. I do want to thank our surgeons that were working at UAPB at the time, Kyler Hecky and Grayson Ferris, and Dr. Lockman did most of the surgeries in planning the transmitters. Lindsay Lewis provided assistance with field work. Kayla Kimmel and Ricky Campbell provided all the information and knowledge about surgically implanting our transmitters. But I also want to thank Jason Olive and 3 anonymous reviewers that provided comments and edits that improved our publication. These are the studies that I mentioned throughout my talk. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions? Eric, why do you think that tailwater area is so favored by these alligator gar?
We're not really sure, but I assume that is providing some ecological benefit, multiple ecological benefits, possibly a flow refuge, possibly congregating forage for them to feed on. It's not just alligator gar that hang out there. We see long nose and short nose also surfacing in that area. We see blue caps there as well. So it's probably a forage source, but also probably a flow refuge during periods of the year.
All right, last question I've got. Why are we seeing these declining populations of alligator gar while the other 3 species we have in Arkansas seem to be stable or not having the same problems?
Yeah, so the alligator gar have very distinct reproductive requirements. They require flooding at the right time and for the right duration. They're a floodplain spawner, whereas the spotted gar, long-nosed gar, short-nosed gar can can flood in just marginal habitat along in backwaters. They really clue in on that flood pulse to go out onto the floodplain to reproduce. And we're just, because of manipulations to our large rivers, damming and leveeing of our big rivers, they just don't have access to that floodplain anymore.
Thanks, Eric. Any other questions before we wrap things up? Okay, Dr. Jim Ballard and Eric Brickman, thank you so much. And thank you to all of us for joining us for the May webinar. And we'll see you next month in June.